Welcome to Unit 7, Effects. And by effects, we're really talking about animation, moving things around, making things appear and go away, essentially making things more active on the page. Now, before we get into this, a word of caution. It's very cool the first time you do something in jQuery and you make, for example, a button show up as if from outer space or something. Animation is cool, but I want you to consider, if you make a user wait for something to show up, even if it takes, let's say, a second, after they've seen this about, let's say, 80 or 90 times, they may be really, really angry with you. So while animations are cool looking, try to keep it to a minimum. Try to imagine your end users actually seeing this animation about 100 or so times. Ask yourself, do they still want to see it, or are they cursing that second? A second seems like a short time, but if you're making them wait for that every single time, let's say something goes wrong in form validation, they will curse your soul. So use everything I'm saying with caution. Let's talk about effects. So you have ways to hide and show stuff. You have ways to fade things in and out. You can do basic sliding type animations. And there's also a way to change multiple different CSS properties at the same time. Let's begin with show and hide, probably the simplest effect. This can be an instant change, or it could be animated where it happens over time. You can actually modify the easing, which is how the duration of the animation is done. That's really for the advanced people. And the code is pretty darn simple. You find something and you hide it. That's it. You find something else and you show it. If you want to change the duration of how something hides or shows, you simply pass a number that represents the amount of milliseconds. jQuery, in this case, will make that thing hidden over 500 milliseconds. Now also, if you want to do something when the animation is done, all you do is provide a callback. In this case, I'm saying when you're done showing, log to the console that the animation is complete. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of this. All right. For this example, I'll be working with one simple paragraph. You can see it has the ID of para 1. And then I have a couple of buttons that's going to drive my different animations. You can see I have 2 for hiding and showing, and another 2 that will do it a bit slower. The code is pretty darn simple. I have click events for all the buttons, and I simply do .hide, .show, and the slow version is specifying a number. In this case, 1000 means 1000 milliseconds or 1 second. Let's run this in the browser and see how it looks. All right, there's my paragraph, there's my buttons. Let's get moving. We'll hide it. You see that was instantaneous. We'll show it. Also instant. And here is the slow version of both. Look at that. How pretty. Let's look at one more example. In this example, I have 2 paragraphs. Now note the second one is hidden by default. Once again, I have a couple of different buttons, so let's immediately look at the code behind this to see what it does. So the first thing I'm going to show is that the hide and show methods both allow you to pass a string. If I pass slow, that equals 600 milliseconds. If I pass fast, that equals 200. This is just something that's baked into jQuery. For my second example, all I'm showing is that I can have a complete handler, something to do when the animation is complete. And in this case, all I'm doing is, in the first one, putting something in the console. And the second one, I'm actually modifying the DOM. Now you can see I have a bit of code there commented out, and we'll get back to that in a minute. Let's run this first and see what it does. All right, so hiding and showing, slow and fast, will do pretty much what you expect. That was the slow, and that was the fast. For the hide paragraph complete, we're simply going to log to our console when it's done. Now the paragraph was already hidden, so we didn't really gain anything there. Let's go ahead and show it. And it worked. Now notice something. I'm going to hide it again. And I'm going to show it and watch how when it's done, it's modified. Let's go back to our code and I'll show you something interesting. So knowing that you could chain things in jQuery, what's wrong with this particular example here? Well, let's run it and see what happens. I'll uncomment it. I'll comment out the other block. And I gotta make my things line up just because. Now let's save this and we'll run it. Okay, let's do show paragraph complete. And did you notice that it was immediately modified? Let's reload it and show it again. As it came in, it was already modified. So what happened? Let's go back to our code. What happened is that jQuery ran the show 1000 and then it immediately did the prepend. It did not wait for show to end. That's why this version works for us a bit better. We're not doing that prepend until we've actually completed the show animation. So what about fading? Well, fading is supported with fade in and fade out. Now, as you can imagine, it's probably going to look a lot like show and hide when we specified a duration. You can also, if you want, do a fade to. So if you didn't want to completely fade out or completely fade in, you can actually specify how much it should fade. There's also a fade toggle, which basically says, I don't care if it's faded out or faded in, just make it do the opposite of where it is now. Here are a few examples. Dot fade in, dot fade out with a duration, and a dot fade in with a complete handler that will run when the fading is complete. Let's look at an example of this. All right, so once again, I'm working with two simple paragraphs and I've built in a couple different buttons that allow me to test various features here. If we look at our jQuery code, first thing I did was cache my two paragraphs. That makes my code a bit easier to use. I have a dot fade out and a dot fade in. Notice that the default duration for both will be 400. Fade toggle works by just doing fade toggle. Again, jQuery will handle knowing what state it is in currently and just doing the opposite. Finally, I have an example of fade to. When you use fade to, you specify a value from 0, which is invisible, to 1, which is completely visible. So basically what I'm saying here is I want to fade to about halfway visible. Let's run this and see how these work. All right, let's first run fade out and fade in. This will look a lot like the show versions. There you go. Fade toggling will just do pretty much if it's hidden, show it. If it's show it, hide it. And there you can see that running. And finally, fade to, again, because we specified 0.5, it's going to be about halfway visible. And there you go. It's about halfway visible. So what about sliding? This is kind of like a blinds type animation. And it's going to work pretty much just like fading and just like showing. But this time we have slide in, slide out. And just like fading, there's also a slide toggle. Some examples on screen: slide down, slide up. I can provide a duration, and like the other ones, I could also do something when it's done. Let's look at the code sample for this. Like my last couple of examples, I'm still working with my two paragraphs. In this case, I'll be doing some sliding with them. And for now, we have three buttons. One to do a slide up, one to do a slide down, and one to do a slide toggle. Let's scroll up a bit, and you can see the code behind this. And it's exactly what we said. Slide up, slide down, and slide toggle. Notice again that the default duration is 400, and you could definitely tweak that if you want to. Let's run this in the browser so you can see what the slide animation looks like. All right, let's slide that paragraph up. Awesome. Let's slide it down. and let's toggle it. There you go, snazzy stuff. So what about doing something a bit more complex? Well, jQuery supports a generic animate function that, given a set of CSS properties, it will animate the changes in those properties. Now, you can only use numeric properties, so think width, think position. You can't do other things like color. Now, it just so happens there's a plugin that adds support for that. But you want to think about things that are numeric and things that you can change with that. You can also do relative changes. So for example, I could say I want to change the width to a hard-coded value like 200, or I can say I want to change it to whatever it is now plus 50. Here's an example of Animate. In this case, I specified two properties, width and height. When jQuery runs this, it'll take the thing that matches that selector and it'll animate a change of width to 200. And it'll also animate a change in height to plus 50. Let's look at an example of this. So I have a paragraph. In this case, it has a few simple sentences. And I have a button that I'm going to use to fire off my change. So here is Animate in play. I'm saying that I want the width to change to 100, so it's going to be pretty narrow. And I want to change the position on screen to wherever it may be to plus 200. Finally, I specify a duration of 1 second. Let's run this in the browser and see what it does. All right, so here's my paragraph, and let's click the button and watch how it changes. Beautiful. Okay, not beautiful, but you know, I'm not a designer, and that's okay. jQuery gives me the power. I can work with someone who has better skills than me and use jQuery to animate it as they see fit.